doing that. Let's see if it lets me share the right screen. It's correct. Sure that my volume is where it should be. Yeah, that should be fine. Resize a few things. There we go. All right. Everything in its place, and every place has a thing. At least that's the way it looks on my screen. Okay, well, we'll just do a little housekeeping before we get going, and that will let people log in as their connection allows them. So just a reminder that Pesach is coming up. Yes. So a Chag Sameach for everybody to celebrate this year. And also as a reminder, as is typical, during the middle of Pesach, what we call Chol HaMoed Pesach, we will not be having class. So there will be no class next Wednesday. That would be, excuse me, let me just check my calendar. That would be Wednesday the 16th. There will be no class. So hopefully everyone will continue to learn, but we will not be doing so together. And with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get down to work. So we are picking up in the standard parasha for this week, Tzav, and this is the second Torah portion in the book of Vayikra. Now, we finished off the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus, by talking about the inauguration of the Mishkan and with Moses assembling everything, erecting the whole Mishkan. However, noticeably absent from the description of its construction, its final implementation, was the inauguration of Aaron and his sons. Well, put off no longer. Now we are going to see that inauguration. Well, that is to say, I'm going to take you to the tail end of some of the instructions of that inauguration, and then the actual first usage of the Mishkan will happen in the next parasha. But we want to pick up here in chapter 8, verse 30. Obviously, you should be reading all of the Torah portion, but I wanted to drill down a little bit on this final section of this Torah portion as we see the final steps that Moses is taking put into operation. And, well, we get an interesting little, conundrum, a wrinkle of what's going on. So let's go ahead here and pick up in verse 30. Moses has been doing a great deal of work to get Aaron and his sons ready, and sacrifices, and tabbing here and blood there, and all of those kinds of things. But now we're at the end of that process. Now, Moshe took some of the oil for anointing and some of the blood that was on the altar and sprinkled it on Aaron, on his garments, on his sons, and on the garments of his sons with him. Thus he made holy Aaron and his garments, his sons, and the garments of his sons with them. All right, so this is the official sanctification that is taking place through a combination of the blood that had been gathered in earlier verses, as well as the oil. Now, this is the oil of anointing, Shemen HaMishcha, and this oil was used to designate something as having a particular role. Here, of course, for the Kohanim, as well as for their vestments, because after all, these are not their clothes. These are the clothes of the Mishkan, which they wear while performing those duties. So that is taken care of. And then we get to verse 31. Moshe said to Aaron and his sons, boil the flesh, meaning from the sacrifices, at the entrance to the tent of the appointment. There you are to eat it, along with the bread that is in the basket of mandating, as I have commanded, saying, Aaron and his sons are to eat it. Okay, a few things we just got to clear up here. So Aaron and his sons, who are about to become the official Kohanim, the official priests, they are to eat from that sacrifice, and they are doing so at that quadrant that has been designated as the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting or the tent of appointment. And they are going to be there from this for this period, and they will be eating from this basket of mandating. I love the English here. Fox makes it sound very awkward, which is what it should sound like. So let's just briefly talk about this word miluim. this miluim that is happening here, this mandating, this inaugurating, this investiture. It's hard to come up with a single English word that conveys what this Hebrew word is. But let's stick with that word investiture, because it's good and ambiguous in English and doesn't get used for very much. This investiture is the term that's being used for their official appointment, that they are being given a particular role within the community, and as such, will have to perform certain duties on behalf of the nation, and as such will be the only people who have been so invested as having the responsibility of performing those particular duties. So this entire process is really the process of miluim, this process of investing or investiture of Aaron and his sons. And because of that, we'll continue on. What is left of the flesh and of the bread in the fire, you are to burn it. We can't give this to anyone else because nobody else is being invested. This is the investiture of the Kohanim, and thus leftovers don't get to go to anyone else. Verse 33. Now, from the entrance to the tent of appointment, you are not to go out for 7 days, until the time of fulfilling the days of full mandating, right, which is, again, lovely bit of poetry. For 7 days it takes to fill your hands in mandating. Now, as you can tell by the brackets, Fox is doing some interpolation here, adding a few words in English that appear to him to be implied by the Hebrew. And what we are getting here is this very interesting, almost play on words, that there will be this fulfilling, this fullness, something that is maleh, is full, of the miluim, which comes with those same root letters. So it's the fulfilling of the full making, or it's the fulfilling of the investiture that is taking place here. Again, the language in Hebrew was very subtle in its interconnectivity between different words and concepts, something that English does as well, but usually not identical in Hebrew, so we can get confused. So there is going to be this fulfilling of them, this investiture of them, and their hands will be made full. All right, now, what does it mean to fill their hands? Well, Fox puts out the most likely interpretation of that to fill their hands is an idiom for the investiture. In Hebrew, to have something in your hand is to have a certain power or authority. It's not within my hands to stop it. What might be an idiom of it's not within my authority or within my power or within my grasp, we even say in English. So what seems to be described here is that there is going to be a 7-day period where they are stuck, hosteling, resting comfortably in this tent of appointment in the Ohel Moed, and that is a significant element for their miluim, for their investiture. So that's what we have as verse 33. We will be coming back to this. So let's go ahead and finish off the chapter, though. 34. As has been done this day, Adonai commanded to be done, to effect purgation for you, meaning there is a type of atonement going on here. Now, we don't know exactly what for. This could be the standard idea that, well, you must have done something wrong, and we therefore need to purge that, or there could be something specific in mind, which we will have to double back onto in our commentary. And then 35, at the entrance to the tent of appointment, you are to stay day and night for 7 days. You are to keep the charge of Adonai so that you do not die. For thus I have been commanded, meaning Moses has been commanded to instruct them that they are to keep that charge. Now, again, we are getting a play on word, well, not a play on words, we're using a repetitive root within the Hebrew, ushmartem et mishmeret, right? That you are guarding, you are observing, you are keeping. All of those words can work for that root. The observance, the charge, the keeping that God has decreed. And the intent of this is to avoid death. Now, What death are we avoiding? Why is the death even in the option? Well, again, we'll have to come back and discuss that, but let's do our final verse. And Aaron and his sons did all the things that Adonai had commanded by the hand of Moshe. So apparently all of it was fulfilled, and we get a sort of parallel the way we had in our previous chapters in Exodus with Moses doing all that God had commanded. Now Aaron is doing all that Adonai had commanded through Moses for a commandment. So we have this level of intermediary, if you will. And again, we get this biyad Moshe, in the hand of Moses, with that idiom in Hebrew, of course, of that it is by his means, by his charge, by his authority. All right, so that's our text that we're going to be working with. And as we can see, they are staying there for 7 days. And this is part of the final step of their induction, their investiture, their miluim. Okay, any questions or comments before we duck into our commentary to see what our scholars have thought about this passage over the last few thousand years? No one piping up, so let's dive in. All right, so the first thing we have to figure out is, when exactly did these 7 days happen? Like, where was this going on? And we're going to turn to Sifra. Sifra is one of those early collections of Midrash Halacha, of a point-by-point analysis of the text according to the earliest rabbinic interpretation. So we're talking about 2,000 years old, give or take, or at least in terms of written down, but obviously many of the traditions were much older. So, and from the door of the tent, you shall not go out 7 days, until the day of the fulfillment of the days of your investiture, that filling of the hands idea. From here, they derived, on the 23rd of Adar, they sacrificed Miluim. That is, the 23 and 7 brings us to the 30th of Adar. Thus, on the 1st of Nisan, they completed the Miluim. So they did the investiture sacrifices from the 23rd day of Adar, which is the month right before Nisan, the month we are in now, the month of Pesach, the month that is called the first day, the first month of the year in biblical counting. And so therefore, we have to work ourselves back 7 days, because we know that this was all completed on the 1st of Nisan, so we can back it up. For 7 days shall he invest your hands, that filling of the hands idea. All the 7 days of the Miluim, of this investiture period, Moses would set up the Mishkan every morning and sacrifice his offerings therein and take it apart. On the 8th day, he set it up and did not take it apart. We're going to come back to why we have this concept of Moses putting up the temple and putting up the Mishkan and taking it down, the place where the sacrifices were being conducted. But for the moment, recognize that this creates a 7-day period where each day there would have been a construction of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, an offering of sacrifices, and then a deconstruction of the tabernacle. And then the next day, the cycle would be repeated. And we do that for 7 days, from the 23rd day of Adar all the way through until the 1st day of Nisan. And then once that was done, Moses was now hands off and was no longer the one in charge of that Mishkan. Now, why is it being done this way? Well, let's take a look at some discussion on that. Because for 7 days your hands will be filled, as we talked about in our verses. Scripture explained a reason for this commandment. As behold, it is not similar to that which Moses warned, meaning forbade, on the 8th day, which we're going to get in Leviticus 10. From the entrance of the tent of meeting you shall not go out. For then the service was incumbent upon the priests, which was not the case during these 7 days when the service was incumbent upon Moses. Okay, so the first thing that Ha'amek Davar is trying to tell us is that your first idea might be, this is just like what happened in Leviticus 10, which is only a couple chapters away, and there they weren't allowed to go out of the entrance of the tent of meeting either. Not so, because during that point, they were already priests. They were Kohanim. Whereas here, they were, if you will, Kohanim elect. They had been chosen to become Kohanim, but they had not had that investiture yet. They were not inaugurated. Therefore, whatever reason there was in chapter 10 for them not leaving cannot be the same reason for why they weren't leaving here. Because right now, the service falls on the shoulders of Moshe, not upon Aharon and his sons. Therefore, for that reason, it gave the reason that they would fill their hands on the 7 days. So that's why we have this extra phrase. That awkward idea of their hands being filled is not just there to say they're completing their investiture, but instead it is telling us precisely why they had to stay where they were during this whole week period. They had to fill their hands for that 7 days. And what does that mean? Well, it doesn't just mean investiture, it means the understanding of which is to study and train the hands with care. For this reason, it warned them to stay and watch Moshe's actions these 7 days. So this is a practical apprenticeship. This is a period of time where, as Moses is doing what he's doing, the members of Aaron's family that are about to become priests are watching it with precision. They are making sure they are taking in exactly what needs to be done, because it's about to become their job. And for that, you need training. So here is the training period. Blink and you miss it because the language is unfamiliar, but it was a necessary element for their true elevation into the job that they were about to undertake. All right. Now, Chizkuni wants to bring up a delicate matter, but one that is not really meant to be laughable and from which we can learn a great deal. So do not leave the door of the tent for 7 days. That's what we've been talking about so far. But he wants to make sure we understand this is not to be understood as house arrest, but means that Aaron and his sons are not to undertake any other activities and not to go to another tent or go to another tent even. However, at night, they were at liberty to perform what any normal person needs to do. All right, that is meant as a euphemism. What Chizkuni is trying to drive home here is that when Aaron and his sons were spending these 7 days in the Ohel Moed, they were not trapped there beyond the reach of bathroom facilities, that they had access and were perfectly allowed to leave that precinct in order to take care of their bodily needs. And in case you need further reinforcement, Ibn Ezra goes into more detail. Some say that, and you shall not go out 7 days, indicates that they went out at night for their needs. Aha, that's what Chizkuni just meant. However, I believe that they went out during the day and night for their needs. All right, what's the difference there? Well, it's that day and night. So rather than just saying they only went out at night because it says stay 7 days, and since days could be read to not include nighttime, maybe they went out at night to do what they needed. He is saying no. Even though it said stay there for 7 days, they could have left at any point during the day or the night in order to take care of their bodily functions. Now, an opposing opinion, a great scholar said that they dug a pit in the courtyard of the tent of meeting in the Ohel Moed. However, this is far-fetched, right? It is simply staggering to Ibn Ezra, and quite frankly to just about anybody, that someone would dig a latrine in the courtyard of the Ohel Moed, that those precincts were not designed for that type of purpose, and there would be nothing wrong with them actually leaving for this other purpose. Because if we go back and we recognize, as Ha'amek Davar argued, that this was a training period, then that was what the focus was. And while training, you are certainly allowed to take a break to take care of your body's needs. That is not going to prevent you from learning what it is you need to learn. In fact, if you didn't do that, you'd be in some serious trouble, both health-wise as well as just with concentration, even trying to avoid that all day. This is one of those elements where the bulk of our tradition comes down squarely on the side of common sense and squarely on the side of human dignity, that we would not expect somebody to spend an entire day without relieving themselves, because that would be, well, inhumane. Nor would we expect them to use the sacred precincts as a place to relieve themselves, that would also be quite impossible to consider. And just to give one more piece of evidence on this idea, on the general humanity and common sense of our people, Scripture states, and the children of Israel wept for Moshe 30 days. So at the end of Deuteronomy, when Moses dies, we see a general mourning for 30 days. But as if there was no moment that they did not weep, right? Of course, it's written that they wept for 30 days, but that doesn't mean they were weeping literally every moment of every day. That would be impossible. Simply be dehydrated, if nothing else. But more importantly, we know that's not how grief works, that a person doesn't mourn visibly through weeping every single moment of a day, no matter how severe the grief is. That's simply not the way a human functions. Therefore, even though the text says, and they wept for 30 days, we know that it didn't mean literally tears for 30 days. Scripture clearly states that they shall sit at the door of the tent of meeting day and night. Our discussion, its meaning is that they shall not occupy themselves with any matter, and they should not go to another place. So, as our other commentators agree, we're not saying that they can't use the bathroom. We're just saying they don't do something else. This is not the time to go read another book. This is not the time to go hang out with your friends and have a beer. This is not the time to distract yourself from any of the magnificent task that is before you. But likewise, it is not going to be house arrest where you can't even walk over to a latrine outside of the area in order to do what your body needs. So again, an excellent example of how there is humanity embedded within the simplest of descriptions, and how there is common sense lurking behind every page of Torah. Now, let's come back from having had this insight and talk more generally about why we were doing what we were doing and what was the attitude that was meant to be imbued in this activity. And for that, we're going to turn to Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic branches of Judaism. You should think, meaning a person should think, that this is the way they should focus themselves. I want to always give joy to him and serve him constantly. This is your mindset, right? Think about giving joy to God. Think about serving God at every moment. Your thoughts should always be attached to the supernal worlds. In him, may he be blessed. Right? We should be thinking not just about the mundane trivia of this world, but thinking about God. Now, this is alluded to in the verse from our parasha, and from the door of the sanctuary who should not go out. And when you must speak about mundane things, because even the Baal Shem Tov, with all of his lofty spiritual goals, realizes it is necessary sometimes to talk about, shoveling behind the cow or feeding the chickens. Imagine that you are going down from the supernal world like a person who leaves his house with the intention to return. Even as he leaves, he is thinking, when will I return? Likewise, your thoughts should always be in the supernal world, for that is God's main house. So, of course, there are going to be times where we have to take care of the, did you put gas in the car kind of questions, and that's fine. But we should try to accustom ourselves to feeling that those are the deviations rather than our moments of spiritual experience. Many people act as though the spiritual experiences, which they might have on Shabbat or at other moments of their day, are the exception, and the mundane is the rule. What the Baal Shem Tov is arguing is that we need to flip that model. We need to feel like we are constantly trying to engage with God, to give joy to God and serve God. And when we have to pull ourselves away from that to take care of the boring things or the bodily needs things, we should do so with a feeling of, I can't wait to get back home, meaning get back to that connection to God. And he continues on our second page of the handout, even when you discuss matters of this world, you should immediately reattach your thoughts to their original place. Try to snap back into that spiritual realm. Again, make it feel that this place, these mundane things are where we have stretched ourselves to, and then when we are done with it, we can snap back into that that place. Where is your bungee fastened? Is your bungee cord that is always pulling you fastened here in the mundane trivia, or is your bungee cord fastened in there, meaning God's realm, and you are pulling against it to do what you have to here, but it is going to pull you back when you are complete? This is what David meant when he said to his son Solomon, I am going the way of all the earth. He is like a person going on a trip, whose thoughts and desires urge him to return to his home as soon as he can. So we get this idea from the end of David's life that he is returning. Rather than leaving this world, he is going back to his actual home. And ultimately, that is something that is true. Nothing wrong with this world. There is so much for us to do and so much that God wants for us to experience and enjoy here. But this is temporary compared to our more permanent residence. Likewise, when the Kohanim were preparing, yes, they definitely did need to leave occasionally to take care of mundane matters, but standing there within the Ohel Moed, that was their true home now. That was the focus of what they were about to become, and that should dominate their thoughts as much as possible. Okay, now, question comes back to our earlier discussion, well, tease, of why are we doing this in the first place? What was this atonement that was going on? Why is there even needed to be 7 days? I mean, we could have just had enough training for them. Does it need 7 days? Maybe they only needed 3 to learn how to do the services. Maybe they needed 15 to learn how to put up the Mishkan. Why are we doing this as a fixed ritual rather than just a internship? Well, the Zohar gives us one answer. The unclean spirit, whose haunting place is the desert, thus found at the moment an occasion to seize hold of him. And so, whereas Israel standing at Mount Sinai were purged the primitive venom of the evil spirit injected into the world, thereby bringing death to all mankind, now the same evil spirit defiled them anew, took hold of them, and brought again death to them and to all mankind, and for all their generations to follow. Scripture says, I say, you are godlike beings, but you shall die like men, from Psalm 82, which we recite on Tuesdays. Aaron therefore had to purge himself afterwards during the 7 sacred days, and after that by means of a calf. So this is a period of preparatory atonement for our most recent stumble as a nation, that we had reached a level of great spiritual elevation. How else could we have heard God's voice so clearly at Mount Sinai? And then we had fallen, stumbled to a low of our normal level as humans when we made a golden calf. So now we need to restore ourselves. We need to prepare ourselves in order to make this transition. Now, this, of course, could have been put on the shoulders of everybody, but as we're going to see, the inauguration of the Kohanim is to create this group of people who will act as an aid, a guide, an assistance towards our ability to continue this process. And see, Judaism doesn't focus on the idea that we are all fallen from that first moment, and thus we need to remedy just that first moment, but rather we stumble continuously. We are constantly making new mistakes. Good for us, that we continually innovate. And we, of course, repeat the mistakes that others have made as well. That means we need a process. We need a pattern of continual renewal, of continual reconnection to what is right and to a continual way to reject what is wrong. And the Mishkan, the temple, the service that the Kohanim are going to officiate at, becomes a template for that process, for that continual attempt to reject what is wrong and to embrace what is right, and to have a service that allows us to feel that effect within us so that we might continue to climb higher and higher. We're still going to make mistakes, but that's why we still have a process for taking care of this issue. So this notion here is not about original sin. It's not about falling from grace or any of the other terminology that has often been thrust into Western consciousness because of the dominance of other theologies, but instead is about the notion that we are constantly going to make mistakes, each individually, and thus we need a way to constantly help us hopefully avoid them, but remedy them when they do inevitably happen, because, well, that's kind of what humans do. All right. In that process, let's go ahead and take a look at Shnei Luchot HaBrit, which is one of the great Musar guides, one of the great attempts to help people understand better how to live a meaningful and worthwhile life. And he is going to build off this idea that the Zohar introduced for us. Let us now demonstrate how Aharon served as the instrument of Adam's rehabilitation, of humanity's rehabilitation. Remember, Adam is not just a particular person. Adam is the term that's used for all of humanity as well. We have already mentioned that the whole purpose of creation was man, was humanity, and that when Adam sinned, he corrupted not only himself, but the whole planet. A classic Kabbalistic idea that if creation was designed so that there would be a place within which humanity could explore what it meant to exist in this way, then when we broke away from what God wanted from us, we essentially debased the entirety of creation, which was made for that purpose. The revelation at Mount Sinai, the process of rehabilitation had advanced to a point where the whole planet, including man, was ready to resume the spiritual and physical level which had existed in Gan Eden. Again, this was alluded to in the Zohar, that at Mount Sinai it had been restored. The episode of the golden calf ruined this rehabilitation. Ever since, the progress towards man's complete rehabilitation has been very halting and irregular. It is now down to individuals, one by one. The establishment of the tabernacle was a major part of whatever rehabilitation has occurred since. The tabernacle plays a huge role in this. The reason that the tabernacle was such a major factor in the process of rehabilitation is that it represented a world reborn. It was meant to be a microcosm of the cosmos. That is to say, the tabernacle represents the world made right, that it was not just a template, but a concrete example, if you will, a diorama of the potential for the world to be constructed carefully in a way that was not only beautiful, but was also very meaningful. And this is what the world, of course, is meant to be. And where we see the world not like that, well, that's the areas that are in need of remedy, of fixing, and of redemption. So the tabernacle acts as that blueprint of, yes, it can exist. Look, we have a small example right here. Within this reborn world, Aaron occupied the place that Adam had occupied on our planet when he was first created. So Aaron has become a new first person. Sacred vestments were made for both Aaron and his sons to take the place of the regular garments made of skin worn by Adam after his sin. So Adam had been forced to wear those garments in exchange for the garments made of light, which he had been equipped with at the time he was created. So Adam was, according to our mystical understanding, was clothed in light. Then when he transgressed, he realized that he was naked and tried to put together his own clothing. Didn't work out so well. And then God was kind enough to give him and Chava clothing made from skins to move on from there. So the clothing that was used in the Mishkan becomes like the clothing of light that humanity was meant to wear from the beginning. So this is, again, a taste, an example, a demonstration of what life should be, what life can be, and that this will then allow that process, halting and irregular as it might be, to continue, where we will continue to rehabilitate humanity and rehabilitate the world, or redeem in the more common parlance. Now, I know that is a little confusing and a little complicated, but You're welcome to ask questions now or later if you would like additional explanation. But let it sit for a while if you like, and well, we'll dive into our next midrash, and then I'll have time for additional reflections. So when we have this 7-day period, of course, there are going to be associations with other 7 days in the world. We've already seen the 7 days of creation as hinted at by our question of the redemption of humanity. But there are other 7-day periods that are of great significance in Judaism, as we're going to see. So here from Midrash Tanhuma, one of the great compilations from the Middle Ages of Jewish teachings, we read, "And it came to pass on the 8th day." Right, that's our chapter 9 verse that we were just about ready to get to, because that 8th day is the day after the 7 days we've focused on. Now, this text, the chapter 9, we're on the 8th day, is related to Ecclesiastes, chapter 8. "Whoever observes a commandment shall not know anything evil." All right, so Ecclesiastes makes this general statement, and our teacher here in the Midrash is going to try and connect it to the 8th day, the actual finale of the inauguration. So, who is this? Who is this whoever that is mentioned obliquely in Ecclesiastes? Well, this is Aaron, of whom it is said in Leviticus 8, the sections we read, "And you," that's to say you and your sons, "shall not go out from the door of the tent of meeting for 7 days. And you shall remain at the door of the tent of meeting day and night for 7 days. Moses said to them, Observe mourning for 7 days, and you shall observe the charge of the Lord." Okay, so the 7 days are now here in the Midrash being connected to the 7 days of Shiva, the 7 days of the mourning process. Like I said, 7 comes up quite a lot in Judaism. After all, we're about to have 7, plus 1 for those of us living outside of Israel days of Passover. But the 7 days of mourning is what occurred to the writer of this Midrash as he looked at these concepts. And therefore, when Moses is saying spend 7 days, what he is actually doing is saying observe Shiva. You should observe mourning for 7 days, and in doing so, you will be observing the charge of the Lord. You will be following God's commands. You will be keeping God's commands. "For so did the Holy One observe 7 days of mourning before he brought the flood." All right, wait, what? I love the fact that Midrash can jump around like this because it forces us to look at the tapestry of the text in a completely different way. So why is this considered God's charge, God's watch, God's shmirah? Well, because God did the same pre-mourning, M-O-U-R, right? Not mourning like the daybreak, but mourning like a grieving. God as well did that period of 7 days in advance of some other problem, and that is what we're now going to focus on. So when you, Aaron and sons, keep 7 days of mourning, because you're not going out, just like a person in Shiva doesn't go out, you will be connecting yourself to the same type of observance that God observed when God did the same. Now, where is it shown that he mourned? Right? Where do we get 7 days of God mourning that we can find as a parallel? Where it is stated in Genesis 6:6, "Then the Lord regretted that he had made humanity on the earth, and he was grieving in his heart." Well, he was grieving can only mean he mourned, for so it says about David in 2 Samuel, "And the victory on that day was turned into mourning for all the people, because on that day they heard it being said, the king was grieving over his son." So we can see there very clearly that grieving and mourning are being used as parallels within the text on David. Therefore, when God is grieving, we can say that God was actually observing a mourning period. It is therefore stated in Genesis 6:6, "And he was grieving in his heart." At that time, the Holy One observed the 7 days of mourning, standard length of mourning that we find in Shiva, before he brought the flood. God mourned and then carried out the disaster. Thus it is stated in Genesis 7, And it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood came upon the earth. So there was God's Shiva in advance of the death that was about to come. Never think that God wanted to bring the flood. Never think that God didn't care about those who were dying in the flood. God indeed grieved for what was happening. And so Moses was saying to Aaron the priest and to his sons, just as the Holy One mourned over his world before he brought the flood, so observe the mourning before he touches you. So they observed, but they did not know for what reason they were observing it. Why? Well, whoever observes a commandment shall not know anything evil, and a wise heart shall know there is a time of judgment. Okay, so we end on a very painful note that they are observing a period of mourning for which they do not understand. They are following God as God mourned for the world. They too are mourning as God mourned for 7 days. They are in a period of Shiva for 7 days, but they don't know the grief that is about to come. God, of course, could know because, well, God is God, but they don't know what's about to come. But of course, in Shmini, the next Torah portion, Aaron is going to witness the death of 2 of his sons, literally at the hand of God, as they make errors in their performance of God's service. That's a whole nother conversation. You can look up my past classes on the next Torah portion if you would like. But for right now, there is a tint, according to this midrash, of mourning. That yes, they are happy that the Mishkan has been completed. They are learning with all their heart all that needs to be done for its service. They are preparing themselves to be of service not just to God, but to their nation. But there is also this undercurrent of, well, risk, of danger, that something terrible could be about to happen, which we know is going to be the death of the 2 sons, but which they themselves were as yet unaware. But they knew that there was the potential. After all, as we saw in the Torah itself, they needed to keep God's charge, or else they could die. And unfortunately, we are going to see precisely that death that comes from a failure when we get into next week's Torah portion. The next parashah's Torah portion. As I said at the outset, there will not be a class next week on Wednesday. So it's important to hold on to this idea that even in our most excited and glad moments, we recognize that there is a hint or a potential that there is always a time of judgment, that there is always a potential for something wrong. Doesn't let us stop our enjoyment, but it is sort of floating there at the edge of our awareness. And of course, we then see Aaron and his remaining family being told how to observe mourning after the death of his 2 sons, which creates a sort of bookend experience with this interpretation. All right, we will leave it there. I'm sure everybody is busy with their Pesach preparations. If you have any questions, feel free to unmute or type in chat. If you don't have them now, you can always ask me during services if you are here in town, or of course, email or any other means of communication, and I'll be happy to continue our study as needed. We handled a lot of difficult texts today. Thank you all for sticking with it, and I hope that you were able to glean some interesting insights, not just into what happened or why, but also ways to look at the world for our own time and our own lives. Take care, everyone. Chag Sameach. May it be a wonderful new festival of freedom, not just for us, but those that are still being held captive, and all that are in need of the redemption that the holiday of Pesach can promise.